Well, we're live and on the screen
Yeah.
and ready to go. It's Friday morning, February 3rd, and we have Laura Ginsburg with us. We'll start off with Laura runs the Dairy Innovation Center and does a host of other things that we see. And so glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
I think you know everyone, but we'll run around the room and introduce ourselves.
Brian Collmore representing the Rutland District.
Irene Runner, Chinden North, including Fairfax.
Brian Campion, Bennington County. Rich Westman, Moyle County.
Great.
And I'm Bobby Starr from Orleans County. So it's great to have you with us this morning, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your activities, and then we'll want to chat in regards to the House supplemental budget proposal, and they did bump that out, I believe, last evening with proposed 9.2 million for our organic guys. So we want to chat about that too this morning. And you're our guest and welcome.
Thank you. So for the record, Laura Ginsburg, I lead the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Dairy Development, Innovation, and Policy work. So I'm engaged in most of our dairy conversations. I've been with the agency for about 5 years. This is a relatively new hat for me. In Diane's transition, I've taken on a lot of the policy efforts and shifted to a more dairy focused role last fall. So prior to that, I was engaged in marketing and farm to school and work lands and export. So kind of many of the programs that we run in the development division. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a presentation here today. So I thought we would start by going over the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. All right, and that's up there. Great. So the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is one of the programs. It's one of the largest programs that the agency has. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking through it today with you, but I left some time at the end for questions, or you can ask me questions throughout. And then also I put together some notes on the organic market, just to put some things in perspective as you're considering the additional funding for the organic farmers. So what is the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center? We are one of 4 USDA funded regional centers. The other 3 are at University of Wisconsin, University of Tennessee, and University of California. We are required by USDA to put out at least 50% of the funds we receive as what they consider subawards, but most easily thought of as grants to the dairy sector. So either to processors, technical assistants, farmers, and producer associations. And from their perspective, the focus is on the development, production, marketing, and distribution of regional dairy products. So under that umbrella, it's pretty broad. So we can fund a lot of different things. We were awarded competitively in 2019. This is a Farm Bill program, so it was established in the 2018 Farm Bill and funded through that Farm Bill. And as you all know, the Farm Bill is up for negotiation. So after our 2023 award that we will receive this fall, we don't know what the future of the Dairy Innovation Center is at this point. It could be written into the Farm Bill as is, all the centers to be funded again. We may have to apply competitively again, or they may take it out. So kind of an uncertain future, but for right now, we are funded through 2026. So each time we get funds, we have 3 years to spend it. To date, we've been awarded $38.7 million. And we will be getting the additional final investment that 2023 investment, and that should be around another 6 to 7 million. So we'll bring us close to $45 million of total funds coming to the region.
That says through 26.
Right. So our FY or our calendar year 23 funds are eligible to be spent through September of 2026. So that's how we get there. So even if the center ends, if it's not authorized in the next farm bill, or we have to compete competitively and we don't get it for whatever reason, we'll still be active until 2026. So there could be some interesting, circumstances between 24 and 26.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Laura, we have one of four.
Mhm.
How many other states applied and didn't get it? If I'm understanding what you're saying?
My understanding is that around 15 applications came in to the original 2019 pool. At that point, there was just three of us. It was Vermont, Wisconsin, and Tennessee. And then there was a little, maybe not a little, there was significant concern raised at the national level that there wasn't a Western center. And so California was added in 2021. We all received the same amount of funding except for California. They've received significantly less money than us. And I'm not sure why that is, but when we get, this last round, for instance, we got $7.53 million and California was able to access about $3 million. So the USDA tells us exactly to the penny how much we have to request. And the original three centers got the same amount and California got a lesser amount.
They tell you how much to ask for?
They do, because it's evenly, according to the authorizing language, it's supposed to be evenly split between the centers.
Oh.
So USDA.
Evenly split.
Mhm.
I think it's so. In the language, the statute, it says evenly split, and California gets less.
Right, I don't pretend to understand federal math. So our team is myself as the lead, Catherine Donovan, who's our program manager, Rebecca Brockett, make sure that we are keeping track of all of our grants and contracts and following all of the state procurement rules and the federal procurement rules. Even though we represent the region, everybody that we award has a grant or a contract agreement with the state of Vermont. So they have to follow all of the state of Vermont rules, even if they're in Maine or Pennsylvania or Maryland. Then we have two grant specialists. Ben Eldridge is one. The next one's under recruitment. The fellow who's in that position is leaving for the Peace Corps next week. Katie Spring is our outreach coordinator. And then we have some additional program support with Julia and Trevor. And our investment strategy, we've developed this in concert with a lot of regional collaboration. We work very closely with the other states. We have advisory committees in other states that provide us with feedback. Those advisory committees are made up of state, university extension, processors, farmers, and producer associations. So we can really get a sense of what's happening on the ground. So we feel like we have four key areas we try to hit with our funding opportunities. First and foremost, which sometimes surprises people, so I'm happy to talk more about this, is the connection to consumers. If we don't have consumers buying our product, then any other investment we make is not going to pay off in the long run. So we think about consumers all the time. How do consumers perceive dairy? How do consumers make choices when they're in the grocery store? What kinds of products are regional consumers eating? How do we best get products to those consumers? Then we think about business management skills. We want every grant applicant to come out the other end of being a grantee or even just an applicant with a better understanding of their business operations, and the kinds of decisions that they should be making. And then because dairy farms are really the bedrock of rural communities and make up a large portion of the region's economy, we see support for rural communities. And that's the communities themselves due to the economic impact of the dairy sector, but also the community of dairy farmers across the region is being critical. So we do a lot of projects that are collaborative in nature or have an outreach component to it. And then because this is absolutely critical, leadership and climate forward strategies. So we think a lot about how do we help farms decrease the energy they use, increase efficiencies, and really position the Northeast region as being the region that's producing the milk and dairy products that consumers want because it is meeting those climate goals.
Now, do you, in that fourth issue, do you do any figuring out the credits if farms do certain projects to reduce their like carbon footprint?
Mhm.
Do you figure out how they're getting credits from their forests and crops they grow to reduce carbon, or is that?
We haven't done a project like that yet. Some of our contract work takes that into account, the whole farm system picture of what's going on in order to reduce their footprint. Our specific focus is on how do we get dairy farms either the equipment, supplies, or training they need to make the best decisions and make production happen in the most efficient and effective ways possible for their farm. So we're going to talk about our projects and investments. We do a lot. It can be overwhelming. So we have about 4 years under our belt now. Of course, 2020 happened with COVID, so we got a little bit of a slow start. So 2021 was really the year that we consider the full launch of the program. So we've had about 2 full years of programmatic operations. So we do education and events. This is one of our first ways that we put money on the ground. So one of the ways we do that is through, we funded UVM Extension to hire 2 full-time staff to provide free dairy herd management technical assistance to any dairy farmer in the state. So whether you milk 500 cows or you milk 10 sheep, you can get that free technical assistance. We have contracts that provide technical assistance cohorts, which I'll talk more about in the next slide. We provided some production education, some safety training for cheesemakers. We took a group of farmers to Missouri last summer to visit New Zealand run operations that are grazing based and seasonal to just understand a totally different production strategy. And we're engaged in international export opportunities with a trade show pavilion at the CL Canada Trade Show. So our project spotlight for this funding is the Dairy Farmer Technical Assistance Cohorts. I know there's a lot of information on this screen, so I won't read it, but you have it in your files to look through. So the goal of this program is really based on some of my time in New Zealand, where there's opportunities for farmers to learn in structured ways from each other for long periods of time. They develop relationships, and then there's peer-to-peer learning that continues even if the program ends. So our goal was to say, we're going to fund technical assistance providers. The providers have to put together a cohort of farmers, at least 5, but no maximum. And they have to meet between 18 and 24 months, at least 6 times as a group, 6 times one-on-one on a specific topic or group of topics. So we focus on, originally it was just transition to grazing, but then we got feedback that that's a little bit too narrow in scope. So we included homegrown forages, alternative herd management, staffing and business management, and marketing and education for the farmer to increase their outreach skills. So we have a number of projects funded. You can see there, we have some with University of Vermont, White River Natural Resource Conservation District, Organic Valley, Cornell, University of Maine. And in total, these contracts are impacting over 150 farmers that are receiving services. And then these farmers are eligible for funding in a different way because they've received services from us, which means that they can access funding in a way that is a little bit different than just somebody who hasn't received the services. And that's according to USDA's rules for this program. So as you can see, outcomes to date, we have some incredible outcomes from this project. I like this quote in particular, Scott Cleveland, who's over in the Rutland, South Addison area that's been served by Cheryl Cesario's pilot cohort. In the first year of getting services, he had feed cost savings of $34,000. He's just so pleased with it. His animals are healthier. He is enjoying actually his time as a farmer more because his animal health is improved, their hoof health is improved, he's saving money on feed. And so what we really see is that when people are linked in meaningful ways to a technical assistance provider and they have that safety net of a consistent group over a long period of time, they can take that step that seems a little bit risky otherwise if they weren't doing it with the support. And then the funding that we provide can help them purchase more fence or water tanks or whatever it happens to be to fully implement the strategies that they've been learning.
Laura, can I just jump in there? How did he exactly save $34,000 on his feed? Did he buy less or different feed or?
He increased, so I believe in this case, they converted cornfield to perennial pasture,
Yeah.
which is a great outcome for those climate considerations. And then he was able to effectively rotationally graze his cows for the summer months,
Okay,
which means instead of having his cows inside, buying feed and
Yep.
having to store it, then having to feed it to the cows were out there doing the work themselves, harvesting the feed. And with the support of Cheryl Cesario at UVM, he was really able to engage in understanding how to do intensive rotational grazing, which is quite a learning curve if you're moving cows from inside to outside. And actually, a lot of times the cows themselves have to learn what to do. So it is quite an interesting opportunity. With feed costs up and down, that number could change, but it could be the same overall impact of increasing dry matter intake from forage that the cows are harvesting themselves versus purchased in feed.
Yep. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's a pretty cheap mowing machine. Turn the cows up.
That's right.
Do you know, Irene, do you have a?
Yeah, are the cows healthier eating fresh feed, or is there no data on that?
So I think what we see is not necessarily in a well-managed system, the cow should be healthy if she's grazing or if she's getting delivered feed. What is a common outcome is that the issues that they may have with their feet and legs go down when they're grazing because they're not standing on concrete. And so you can see if you have a hoof trimmer come 3 times a year and they're having to treat some hoof ailments, or sometimes cows get swollen hocks from being on concrete or from laying in sand beds that may not be well maintained. There's a lot of issues just with having cows inside, and not saying that having them outside cures everything, but it certainly does have a decreased impact to their hoof and leg issues. So you save money that way too.
And the milk tastes different, right?
I believe that is true. We actually have a project with Heather Darby and Roy DeRocher, who's their sensory person, who's looking at how different feeds impact, especially cheese. So I think there is a lot of science behind that, the impacts to milk flavor and quality.
Thank you.
Mhm. So the next way we put funding out is through competitive grants. You can see we have a long list of grants here. If you subscribe to the agency's press releases or you get those, you'll note that this week we released $13 million in processor focused funds, and then an additional $1 million for a Cornell focused program on a dairy products competition. So we put a lot of money out there. We just closed a $900,000 round yesterday on dairy farm innovation, so focused on farmers only doing innovative projects on farms. So we'll be awarding that $900,000. We got about 63 or 65 applications. I don't know the total dollar amount yet, but it's definitely oversubscribed.
What type of innovations do you recall what any of them were?
So there was some focus on robotics or technology. So thinking about ways to monitor animals, either in a confined feeding type, a freestall type barn, or using animal technology to allow grazing to occur farther away from the farm so that you don't have to have visual contact with the herd at all times or throughout the day to see what's going on with the animals, make sure they're laying down enough, make sure they're ruminating. If somebody's in heat and needs to come back into the barn to be bred, you can do that all with collars and technology. There's some interesting work on satellite fencing. So it's like the satellites determine the area of pasture, and then the cows get a signal not to cross over a certain line. So you don't actually have to put fence up. The cows just know not to cross the invisible line. There's a lot of interest in conversion over to bedded pack barns from freestall barns because of a decrease of water quality impacts and just how to manage those facilities differently. So we saw a huge range of projects. I'm excited to start reading through them.
So we funded any of the no fence grazing?
We have not through the Dairy Innovation Center, but there are some pilot projects going on in the US, and this technology is a little bit farther ahead in Europe, and I believe Australia.
was before you spoke, I'm reading an article from the English Midlands about it.
Mhm.
Isn't Smith working on something like that?
He is, yes, Dan Smith. We received an application from the Strolling of the Heifers and the Agribusiness Institute specifically for that project. And I think there may have been one other one in there, but I haven't looked at all of them yet.
Yeah, Reggie hates building things.
It's not that I hate building
It's
fences.
just time consuming.
It's terribly, and it's expensive.
Mhm.
Fencing is expensive, and apparently in Norway, it's the norm now to use the satellite system in the fence.
I think it is really interesting technology because you can make your pastures odd shaped. They can go through the trees. They can go over rocky terrain where you otherwise wouldn't be able to build electric fence.
It was goat farmers in Norway in the mountains.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
I'll be there.
Neat.
So we'll see. And that's what we get excited about is we have the opportunity to fund things that you just can't get money for elsewhere.
Yeah.
So one of our major projects that we do is the marketing and branding grants. And this is a real testament to the power of providing generally small processors is who we work with funding that is specifically for them to work with a professional to upgrade their marketing and branding. So we provide grants. They have to use at least 75% of the grant funds for the professional services. And that way we are ensuring that they are devoting enough of the project time to thinking about and working with this professional, and then they can use the remaining 25% for implementation. We funded 2 rounds of these, totaling about $845,000, and we have 5 Vermont grantees. Richmond Hill is the farm side of Oak Knoll Dairy, who you see in the picture. Nothing But Curd is a cheese producer. Lulu's Artisan Ice Cream is ice cream. Plugate Creamery is butter. And then Von Trapp produces a variety of products. And you can see here the transition from Oak Knoll's sort of really dated label on a traditional half-gallon jug, pretty boring, didn't stand out on the shelf. And then they were able to develop and launch this new brand line, complete with a new website, media or a brand strategy guide, social media posts, and this beautiful labeling and a container revamp. So their product really pops on the shelf now. So you can see some grant impacts here. These are both from Vermont grantees. So you can see one of them said in 2020, they did about 17,500 in online sales. In 2021, with the help of this grant, they did 40,000 in online sales and increased their customer visits by 69%. And another grantee said that since the rebrand, they've had 50,000 more in sales in the prior year with demand up 40%. So you can see and these grants are not huge. The maximum is $75,000, but it's a really meaningful investment into these businesses who otherwise either don't have the time, capacity, or knowledge to devote to like a really professional marketing and branding campaign.
Nutritionally, how's goat milk compared to cow milk?
Well, I think what's the part that most people cite is that the molecular structure or like the fat protein structure of goat milk is different. And so people who are unable to digest cow milk can digest goat milk. It doesn't separate naturally into a cream milk line. So if you let it sit, it will stay all mixed together, right? So, and there is a goat milk and sheep milk to a lesser degree, but goat milk as a alternative fluid milk, but not a plant-based milk, is a category that's showing strong market growth. So we want to make sure that we're there because otherwise most of the fluid goat milk is coming out of California. So this is our dairy packaging innovation grant. I know I spoke a little bit about that when I was here with you last time. So this grant in particular was focusing on reducing the use of virgin plastics in the dairy supply chain and modernizing packaging initiatives. So we funded 5 projects. We released $1 million and we funded $1.1 million. And we received about $2.5 million in requests. So we funded Agrimark for a plastic film project for their 8-ounce blocks. Big Picture Farm, who you see here, that's Louisa and Lucas. We notified all the awardees on video chat, so we got to get a picture of them, finding out that they were getting about $147,000 to revamp their entire packaging line. They make goat milk caramels that have won significant national awards.
And they don't have to pay it back. It's a grant.
It is a grant.
Great.
Right? So there's no payback. There is a significant educational and outreach piece to these grants. So we were not allowing people to develop things that would be proprietary information. So they have to share out both what they did and the results of that work so that other people can adopt either the same products or technologies.
The plastic rat film for Cabot, did that work out?
They're about 6 months into their project. So all of these projects started last fall, late summer, fall. So a lot of them are just actually getting the orders of the film in bulk delivered, and we'll start doing test runs this summer, spring to summer.
And is that something that can be used through automated rack?
That's what they're finding out. So both Agrimark, Stellars at Jasper Hill, and actually Vermont Creamery, they all have plastic film projects. And part of the work is all of the products that they are working with are different. So Vermont Creamery's Goat Chev has a higher moisture content than, say, Cabot's cheddar. And so one plastic film does not fit all because there's different qualities of the product and also how it is actually put into the plastic. And so they are going to be testing that to make sure it runs through the equipment. Does the heat sealing machine need to be adjusted? Does the vacuum machine need to be adjusted? Is the moisture content of the product going to degrade the materials? Because they're all testing recyclable, compostable, or made out of post-consumer recycled content plastic film. And then Stonyfield is working on their Yo Baby pouch. So right now it's a 3-layer pouch that can't be recycled. They're moving towards a 2-layer pouch, and they're lightweighting the cap. That's their highest volume product. They sell, I'm going to say something like 80 million, multiple tens of millions of pouches across the US each year. And if those pouches could be recycled, that would be a huge step forward.
Yeah.
So then the final way we invest funding is through research and development. And we often use these projects as a way to guide future funding opportunities. We did present last year about the distribution network study. That was a regional study of the distribution capacity and areas and needs for development. We looked at goat dairy, consumer perceptions of brands themselves, and there was a toolkit developed out of that so that even if you can't work with a professional, you can have professionally developed resources to understand your brand positioning in the marketplace and where the low-hanging fruit is to invest. We've got the specialty cheese project on, it's really interesting. They're looking at how farm-based practices impact the end product sensory qualities of specialty cheese and how farm practices can be modified to create a product that actually consumers desire more. Goat and sheep consumer demand, and then this dairy product innovation challenge with Cornell that I mentioned. So the project spotlight here is the distribution system. This is just a screenshot of the report. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so as you think about distribution. Distribution works really well in the region, specifically for refrigerated products, but not necessarily for frozen. But what they found, and this is just one of the key findings, is that it's pretty brittle. So if one business were to go out or to suffer, loss of a truck or multiple trucks, that there would be no way really for that excess product to be moved out into the regional marketplace, with New York City and Boston as the key hubs for further distribution. So I think what's interesting about what we do, so this study actually came out of the Vermont Dairy Market Assessment that the legislature requested we do, that was delivered in February of 2020. They recommended a further study on distribution because that was one of the weak points in the system. So then we were able to say, okay, we'll do a distribution study. The distribution study itself found that workforce is actually one of the most critical aspects of the distribution system. That workforce at plants is holding up the ability of processors to make more product and then reach more markets. And so now what the Dairy Innovation Center is doing is we've put about $1.25 million towards workforce development. And we'll be looking for a contractor. That contract request will be going out next week to really start to develop a program that's focused on processing and farming, and how do we think about workforce development specific to dairy in the Northeast region that's different than other parts of the US. So we use
had
these to
people-
develop.
We had, John, guy from Hardwick, from the,
John Ramsey.
yeah, from the center. And, I mean, they've got trucks running here and running there, and I mean, the way he described that, it's a real issue not to do backtracking, trucks meeting each other. Yeah, there's a lot to that, and I don't know if he works with you at all on any of that strategy stuff.
We have worked with the Center for an Ag Economy, and they were interviewed as one of the keystone distributors in our state to move product around as part of the distribution study. So we certainly keep an eye on what's going on. Food Connects as well down in Brattleboro, they're a really critical player to move products to the southern part of the region. So these are the funding totals. These have actually changed as of yesterday because we had an application close. So when I put this together earlier in the week, we'd received 353 applications. Now we're up over 380 with a request now about 19.7, or no, that's not correct. It would be about $21 million now. So these numbers change on a weekly, it seems like, basis. So every time I pull them, they're different. We've made 126 awards totaling $9.2 million with an average award of $73,000. Vermont specifically, we've received 118 applications for $6.9 million. We've awarded 44, total funds being $3.78 million. And our average award there is $86,000. So right in line with the regional average. And we're really, what we have seen is that there was when you looked at the applications we'd received earlier on, proportionately, we were receiving more from Vermont because we had that direct connection. Now word's gotten out that we have real money on the ground, that the projects are working, and we get a lot of applications from New York, Maine, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. So before I jump into organic dairy projects, I just want to make sure if there's any questions about sort of how we do the work that we do, or any of the project
It must
highlights.
be, like, you must have to go through all 380 applicants to figure out which ones are the best. That must be, is that a timely process?
It is. So every time we close a round, so for example, the farm innovation round that closed yesterday, we work year round to recruit reviewers, and we have a reviewer base that's from across the nation. So we have reviewers from California and Wisconsin, and the Center for US Dairy Innovation in Illinois, and from across the region. And then we assign reviews. So every application is reviewed by 3 people, unless it's a really big project, then we usually have 5 reviewers on
Now,
it.
these are people not at the agency, but people you hire.
We don't hire them, they volunteer their time. But we do have agency reviewers as well. And the reason that we do agency reviewers is that way we have essentially like a subject matter expert for every application that we can call on and say, what were the real strengths of this application? What were the weaknesses? Did you have concerns about the budget? So every application is scored, and then we have a review meeting where we go through and we look at the scoring of the application, but then we also look at the geographic scale and species diversity. So we know sometimes that some farms may have better access to technical assistance or grant writers, and other farms may be doing this on their own and they don't have those resources. So we try to take all of those parts and pieces into consideration and make decisions based on being representative of the region and where the applications came from. And then every applicant gets feedback, whether they're funded or not. They get reviewer comments.
Yeah.
We're on the phone a lot, answer a lot of emails.
Yeah, I can imagine with that many applications,
Mhm,
there'd be a lot of communication
mhm.
needed. And your last thing up there, at the ag agency, you're convening the organic task force.
Mhm. Right, so I can switch into our organic dairy. I know you had some questions about how much we've invested in organic dairy through the Dairy Business Innovation Center particularly. There's also investments in dairy and organic dairy that come through other avenues of funding that we receive. So like the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative funds organic dairy. In 2019, we received $500,000 of extra funding that was specifically directed by the legislature to support dairy projects. So in that year, we had an additional $500,000 that had to go to support dairy. So sometimes there's more investment from Working Lands in dairy than in other years. It really depends on the applications and the total funds available. We also have smaller dollar projects like local food market development, where people can apply for small equipment or supplies in order to reach larger either institutional or wholesale markets. So in total, the Dairy Innovation Center, combined with the $200,000 of general fund that we received for the transition support grants, we've invested $1.585 million just in organic dairy over the past couple of years. So the $200,000 in state funds that I spoke about last time I was here with you, and then grants to support farmers. When Horizon announced that they were exiting and those farmers were going to be picked up by Organic Valley or Stonyfield, Horizon had different requirements for their farmers, less, I don't want to say restrictive, but less restrictive, that's the only word that's coming to me, than Organic Valley and Stonyfield. And so those farmers had to make some really quick adjustments in order to be shipment ready for their new buyer. So we provided a grant to NOFA Vermont. You can see here $124,500 to work with every impacted farmer. They had access to $5,000 in funds to buy the supplies they needed. A lot of times it was a bulk tank chart recorder. Sometimes it was change to some of their calf housing. So there are lots of ways that they could use that funding, but it was essentially like, here's $5,000 of quick money to make sure you are ready to get on that truck when they're going to come pick you up. The Agency of Agriculture also convenes the Organic Dairy Task Force, which met 3 or 4 times last year and will be meeting every 6 weeks, starting in mid-February for the rest of the year, just given the current circumstances of organic. And then across the region, we have funded, we open right now, we have $450,000 in on-farm milk storage and handling grants. Specific for organic farmers. We just closed that round for anybody to apply to in the fall. We received 178 applications requesting $7.8 million. And we just weren't able to fund a lot of the organics. And what we see in this sector in particular is that these farmers are, they are great at maintaining their equipment, and many of them are using bulk tanks from the 60s and 70s that have coolant that has been discontinued. The tanks may need a recharge of coolant, and we know that those things are absolutely terrible for climate, and we want to get those tanks out of there and get new efficient tanks put in. A lot of these farmers are also on everyday pickup, which is not efficient or effective for everybody.
Small tank.
It's a small tank, right? So we want to make sure they're on every other day pickup. So we have a $200,000 grant to the Northeast Organic Dairy Producers Association to look at institutional demand of organic milk and where that milk could come from, where it could be processed, and the price points. 2 similar grants to what we did to NOFA Vermont, one for NOFA New York, who had the bulk of the farmers impacted by the exit of Horizon and Maple Hill, and a smaller one to MOFGA up in Maine. $90,000 grant to the Northeast Organic Family Farm Partnership that was really focused on consumer purchasing behaviors and getting them to purchase organic products that were sourced from family farms in the region. $33,000 for the Maine Organic Milk Company, additional grant for MOFGA and technical assistance for that state's organic dairy sector, and about $150,000 contract to Organic Valley for climate smart training to farmers in the region. So we've made quite a few investments in organic over the past couple of years.
And do you get a report back from each one of these on their accomplishments?
We sure do. We because we're a federal program, there's extensive federal reporting we're required to do. And so we have all of our grantees and contractors provide us with interim reports throughout their project. That's how they're able to access funds, and then a final report with change in sales, change in employment, change in production practices. We ask a whole suite of questions that are very comprehensive.
Because, you know, we had a request from the organic group here in Vermont for 9.2 million. And but it's all it was a direct ask and to pay the farmers direct $5 a hundredweight. And there was no mention of, well, the problem, you know, what the problem is or who's causing the problem or why are we having this problem, and no mention of remedies to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some of these studies that you're funding, there might be some corrective action that could be taken in marketing
Mm-hmm.
somehow to, so if we do go along with that this year, they won't be back in next year or the year after needing 9.2 million again, because we haven't addressed the issue that caused the shortfall. When do you expect some of these results to be back?
The Northeast Organic Family Farm Partnership Grant just wrapped up, so I could send along some of those outcomes. That was direct consumer outreach and essentially what they called a buyer activation campaign. So they did a lot of sampling in stores, a lot of talking to consumers to say, you know, when you purchase an organic product that's from a Northeast farm, this is the impact it has on the economy, on the community, on those farm families in particular. So I think they had some really interesting results there. And then the Northeast Organic Dairy Producer Association study, that's going to wrap up this summer, looking at the institutional market demand. I did put together some other information just to share with you about sort of what has happened in the organic dairy sector. So let's see. It is, okay, let me share this new screen here.
I would think that, you know, our guys are pretty focused and, you know, pretty good business people.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think Maine and in the other neighboring states would be having the same problems. That, do you know if they are?
Right. So we talk a lot to New York and Maine in particular. We have great relationships with their either NOFA or MACA and the state agencies there, just to really understand what's going on. I would say of the states, Maine may be in a more precarious position because they are geographically more isolated.
Yeah.
So things have to move up there, feed and supplies have to, usually they're coming from Vermont or New York into Maine, and then the raw milk has to flow out. And their farms, just like Vermont, except maybe to a greater degree, are geographically dispersed. They can be challenging to get to. They're very small. And I think there are just a lot of concerns in our region's organic because it has been a perfect storm of the increase of grain prices, so input prices skyrocketing, diesel, sawdust, but grain in particular. And those inflationary pressures are being felt across the organic sector as a whole, but also inflation on the consumer end means that consumers are making different choices when they're going to the grocery store. And I just read one of a report or an article in a dairy news magazine saying that for the first time ever, a gallon of conventional milk is within 50 cents of the price of a half gallon of organic milk. And so if you are feeling the squeeze in your own personal pocket and you have, kids in a family, you're going to possibly choose which products you're going to buy. That doesn't mean you're not going to go back to organic, but right now, while inflation is still impacting consumers, there are different choices being made at the grocery store. So I just wanted to, I think sort of understanding the national perspective is really important because Vermont's dairy sector is critical to our state, critical, key to our economy. Over $3 million of circulating cash per day is generated in the state because of dairy activities. So what you can see is nationally, and the best numbers that I could find were in 2020 for comparison's sake. Across the nation, 9.1% of farms were organic, representing just 3.6% of cow numbers. And of that, they produce 2.3% of total milk. So just a small fraction of the overall milk production. But what we see is that the top 5 organic milk producing states, which happen to be the same as the top 5 for conventional milk, California, 150 organic farms produce 889 million pounds of milk. Texas, 9 farms produce 821 million pounds of milk. So these farms are right. So they are of a different scale, almost like in a different dairy universe than the farms and the farm structure and the farm supply chain in the Northeast, in New England, and in Vermont particularly. In Vermont, in
They can't be running under the same rules that we are. To have that many cows.
it's the same rules interpreted differently. So that's where USDA has been working to tighten up some of the organic loopholes to say 5,000 cows on one farm is, maybe that's not meeting the organic standards.
And
their intent.
pasturing and being able to be, not caged up or housed up and.
Right, so some of these farms are milking somewhere, 3, 5, 6,000 cows. So they're very large operations. And we know that large operations have the benefit of scale. So it costs less to produce milk. Cows actually produce more milk generally on larger operations as well. Oftentimes they milk 3 times a day, which increases the volume of milk produced as well. So in Vermont, you can see in 2020, almost 25% of our farms were organic that year. We had 187 total organic farms of 636 total. In 2022, 28% of farms were organic. It's 153 total, 530 total farms. I've been trying to find out if Vermont is actually the state with the highest percentage of organic farms for total dairy farm population. I haven't officially been able to nail that down, but my sense is that it's either going to be Vermont or Maine with the highest percentage.
Yeah, I mean, boy, from 20 to 22, we lost 30, 34.
Yeah.
Right. Some of those farms actually transitioned from organic to conventional. So it may be a loss of an organic farm, but not necessarily the loss of a farm. Also, there is some farm consolidation happening where they would have 2 separate farms that are combining into one farm. So it's not that there's a decrease in the number of cows or production. There's just one less farm location. So in our, this is looking at NOFA's cost of production study in 2020. The average herd size was 77 cows, about 1.2 million pounds of milk per farm, which means that in 2020, Vermont's total organic milk production was about 222 million pounds. And you can see compared to the average or to the total milk production in other states, that's about a quarter of California's production, which means that we have to compete differently because those farms are selling milk into Costco, into Walmart, into Target, and their store brand labels as organic milk that is cheaper than the organic milk that's produced in a values-based system in this region. And I think that's just really important to keep in mind as we're thinking about what's going on in organic right now. Now, this is even going back farther, 2005, where I'd say this is where some people would say organic had finally caught on, and you saw some really rapid growth, particularly in the Western states. So on the left here, you can see farms. The West is in green. They represented at that time 7% of the organic farms, but 31% of the cows. So you can see already in 2005 that we are being outcompeted by these really large farms in the West. It is cheaper to produce feed out there. It's cheaper to house animals because they can be outside year round. And there's a greater volume of large-scale processing plants, particularly in Idaho, Oregon, and California. There's also a lot of consumers out there, so it can be easier to move milk around. They don't have winters like we do. So there's a lot of competing factors that make it harder to be a successful organic dairy in the Northeast, in Vermont, in Maine, than out West. And this is really the foundation of what is happening now, where we're saying there's a lot of organic milk on the market. It is competing differently. We are producing milk that aligns with the USDA organic standards. It's providing a livelihood for small farm families, for small processors, and for regional consumers. And it's just
Small
It is-
community.
right. It is at a different scope and scale than what's happening in other parts of the country.
All right, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may not know the answer to this, Laura, but I was in the House yesterday when they were debating the Budget Adjustment Act. And someone brought up the fact that the 9.2 million, which has been requested, I'm trying to think of the process that it's going to go through. It asks the agency to come up with the plan, in essence, by March 15th, I think. And then it gets sent back to the legislative committees of jurisdiction for approval. I'm just trying to walk through the timeline, and at some point, I don't know whether that's April or even May before the actual money is allocated, if you will. And I think it's based on production. So the $5 hundredweight that they're talking about will be multiplied by how many pounds of milk they do. So it seems like for a problem that's acute, I mean, we're losing a dairy a day. I mean, that's the sort of story I'm hearing. And yet the solution to it probably isn't going to affect anybody until spring or even summer. Am I correct?
I think.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. So the timing is absolutely critical. It depending on the structure of the program and how we are requested to put the money out. We can either do that rapidly or we can do that more slowly. So I think if we are thinking of a program that is as requested, $5 a hundredweight, what we'd have to get to confirm that the per producer payment would be a year-end summary of their milk production. And then we just do a simple calculation of the hundredweights times 5, and then off you go, you get a check. If it's more complicated than that, if we are paying on back due balances and we're paying on monthly production, or thinking about the COVID relief program that we did, where farmers had to submit milk checks based on a sort of set price that the legislature decided on, and then we paid the difference of that price for every month of 2020. That program takes a lot more time. It takes staff time to run it. People have to apply and submit paperwork. So the timing of the program and how fast it's going to take to get the money on the ground is going to be highly dependent on the structure of the program itself.
But was I correct that legislative approval still needed at the end of the plan?
I have not had a chance to
Okay.
read through the specific, but I know that it was 9.2 million requested.
Don't know.
Brian.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess, I mean, you can see the pressure certainly on little farms.
There's a big,
Without a doubt.
there's a big white spot there though in the middle.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't want to become one of them.
yeah. But
Like New Hampshire,
Yeah.
right.
we're headed in that direction.
But I'm wondering, in terms of our process, are you hoping, Mr. Chair, that we will give a recommendation to approach, or are you feeling like that'll be handled down there as, on this, the 9.2?
I'm quite sure we'll be asked to
Okay, weigh in.
look over the situation and forward our recommend to them because, if you think about the grand scheme of things,
Yeah.
what we have to do down there in the 8.6 billion, the 9.2 is a small
Yeah.
part of that process, but it would be a big part of our process here. So it'd be better, and I think the chair will be asking us to,
Weigh in some way, okay.
I think we have the time to.
Yeah,
get a
yeah,
good
right.
review and
Yeah,
and try to figure out the process that we're gonna ask Laura or the agency to do that would be most conducive to their previous policies and in the easiest way to get it done.
yeah,
So I think it would be our.
yeah, I was just curious, all right,
Would be our job.
thanks.
We've had an initial conversation internally at the agency with the leadership team and our business office, just to understand the capacity and the potential and be ready.
Okay, yeah,
So we're happy to provide whatever additional support or information would be helpful.
Yeah, and to try to figure out, how we don't prevent this from
right, that's great,
happening.
absolutely.
Next
Yeah,
year or
yeah, right,
the
right.
year after, because
Yeah,
if you
those are
just
thin margins,
throw money at an issue without any resolve to the problem,
yeah,
you're,
yep,
you're not doing too well.
yep.
I guess if you've got all kinds of money, and there's no interest, you can keep throwing good money at it.
The other
But we're
question,
certainly not in that.
Yeah, category, yeah.
I think the other question, appropriations will be centered around what you asked, because normally, in a normal situation, unless it's an emergency of some kind, a change in policy is not usually welcome for the budget adjustment. Changes in policy are generally done in the budget.
Right.
There are exceptions to
Yeah.
that, but
Does this warrant that?
yeah, the first question that I think you'll see asked in appropriation is this absolutely the time that it had to be versus that? And if you've got a process where you're not gonna have an answer till May, the question would be, why don't you do it in the budget?
And that was
Yeah.
speculation on my part, but
It's a good
I gotta
question.
look exactly at what was asked for in the BAA, because that's what I heard on the floor yesterday in the House, and I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what was said.
This, to set a new program up, to do it in a week or two, there's gonna be holes everywhere. We aren't that clever. So, I think it'll probably get pushed to the big bill, the budget bill, not the,
The adjustment,
and there's ways that you can start this in the big bill, before July 1.
right, yeah, yeah,
You build something into
Yeah.
that, so at least if we do decide to do it,
Yeah,
we work out a plan and get it.
yeah.
So here's my question from what you've just said. Did the agency testify in the House on how they would set it up and what they would do?
I don't believe we were asked to testify on the program specifically. We did not join for the joint hearing that you had about the organic dairy. I believe that was last week,
You heard what we heard.
right? So I did listen in on that and we had a meeting internally. But I do not believe that we provided any content to the House.
Yeah, prior to why I was a couple of minutes late, I was meeting with the chair of the House Committee. And felt bad that he hadn't come down and,
Had a conversation.
yeah. And be, being new at it.
Yeah, yeah.
And having basically,
Yeah.
with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 people, it's a totally new committee.
Yeah, yeah,
It's understated.
yeah.
But we'll deal with it in
Yeah.
a positive way, I'm sure.
So, Mr. Chair, is it accurate to say then the administration hasn't taken a position on this right now?
I don't think anybody has.
Okay, just the group that we heard from, okay.
Well, when the House did vote,
Right.
I think he told me there was a couple of questions yesterday, but very minimal on the House side.
Yeah,
But they've got their new membership. so,
yeah.
But
Anyhow, thanks, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Laura, if you haven't get it figured out across the street,
Call us.
yeah. No, we'll, and you're gonna be doing a lot more with dairy, right? Doing Diane's work.
Right, since Diane Bothwell retired, I am taking on more of her dairy policy work, so
Yeah.
coordinating the Milk Commission, the Organic Dairy Task Force, working with the different organizations to understand pricing and markets, supply chain, all of those parts and pieces.
Yeah, well, that's almost a full-time job without what you're already doing, so.
It's definitely a complicated area.
Yeah.
My brain will be getting bigger thinking about dairy pricing.
Either that or blow up on.
Right.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah.
This morning and look forward to working with you, in the future.
Thank you.
And, if you run across things that you think we can be helpful with, just give Linda a call, because you'd be next to impossible to catch any of us. But, send us an email and we'll have you in whenever you need.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And anytime, you need more information, we're happy to come across the street.
Yeah, and maybe this issue you could, next week, a week from Monday, you're having a Milk Commission meeting.
That's correct, on the 13th.
Maybe you folks could talk a little bit about this issue. I don't know if there's any organic farmers on the Milk Commission.
I'm not sure, and I didn't put it on the agenda because we weren't sure how fast it was going to move in the Budget Adjustment Act. So we'll
Well, if
certainly
you get
add that
a
in.
chance, but if there's no organic person on that board, if you bring it up, the others will, maybe will ask, well, why is it just for them? We're bleeding too,
So I
anyways,
I would just say that we'll be doing the budget adjustment and appropriations. And I would expect by the end of next week, we'll be pretty close to done. So
oh yeah, it'll be over by the time you meet next week. I bet we'll get that
yeah,
out.
we're gonna get, so I would think that this committee hearing. I don't want to get in front of the chair, but I would think that if we're gonna weigh in, we'll want to hear from the agency and whoever we can to weigh in next week.
Well, I mean, Laura's the one that we'd have to get in. Well, if you folks talk about it over there, and you come to any resolve at all, yeah, it would be good to try to get back by Thursday at the latest of next week.
Yeah, because she did say if you structure it this way,
Oh,
if you structure it that way, and if we had, that would be helpful to know. Particularly, if we got to weigh in, I mean.
I would quicker think though that it's not gonna make the supplemental
I don't think so either, but people will ask,
because we won't have the
right,
necessary pieces to put in the supplemental to make it work in an efficient way. Unless we just send you a note over to the agency, do this in the most efficient way.
There you
Thank
go.
you. And
the legislature never does that.
no. But,
Right,
we've set up other programs and the DMC thing was set up pretty well, working with you folks and, so anyways, if you do, come to any conclusions over there, maybe we'll just set up a time.
okay, we'd be happy to propose a few different ideas to you and come back next week if that would work. And if I can't make it, then the agency's attorney, Steve Collier, could
Yeah,
potentially
Steve.
make it. I'll be out of town a few days.
Yeah.
So I think we could definitely provide some additional information for you as you're making these decisions.
Yeah, very good.
Great, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
See you.
Linda, do you know if Michael was going to be with us? or not?
Were you suggesting something, Mr.
Well,
Vice
he
Chair?
isn't.
No, I just wanted more information. That's what I heard and I thought,
Yeah.
if it's gonna be 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we need to hear from the agency.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Some info.
You're right.
Well, yeah, you can't just. I mean, if you ask me for a buck, I might just give it to you, but if you wanted 100, I might say, well, Richie,
Right.
we gotta work out a little plan here.
Don't be too cheap, Bobby, you know? I'll be good with you.
Yeah, I'll use your fare. And I usually take 6 months to pay mine. Anyways, we'll try to stay on top of this and come down there. We're lucky that there's 2 of us down there.
Yeah.
And have been there. So we'll get started on our right to farm stuff.
Should I join you?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Scott, I have a button up here. Yeah, push it.
Eject me. I'll be careful then.
Gotta push them both at the same time.
It really is a trap door in the floor.
Okay, so I have to be worried about going through the ceiling and the floor as well, eh? Yeah, just in case.
It'd be bad if they both open at once.
Oh, it would be bad. I'd have to guess which way how to try to save myself, right? Fantastic.
Well, welcome to the
Thank you very
committee.
much.
We've had a request to bring the right to farm legislation up, and it was, I don't know, 10, 15 years, or 20 years ago that we put that together, and some farm groups have requested, an up-to-date version of that. And so I spoke with Jared, and he said that he didn't know much about right to farm, just that farmers should have a right to farm and keep them farming as long as they possibly can. But thought that maybe you would be
Absolutely.
the right person, on the environmental issues.
Sure.
That we, I guess they're in the bill that we need to deal with.
Sure.
And I think one of the issues that we hear about more often than we should. I mean, we should hear about it, but it's getting to be louder, is the trespass issue.
Sure, yeah.
And so we'll introduce ourselves
Fantastic.
and jump right into it. Perfect. Go from there.
Brian Collmore representing the Rutland District.
Irene Renner to the north.
Brian Campion, Bennington County.
Rich Westman, Lemoya.
And I'm Bobby Starr from Orleans County.
Fantastic.
So I presume that you've had an opportunity to look that draft proposal over. And so, you can introduce yourself and a little bit of your background, and we'll get right with it. And
Absolutely.
we run kind of a loose committee. As you're presenting, if one of the members, has a question, they'll, raise their hand or just ask it.
Perfect. That would be wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
not too formal, We try to give everybody a fair shake. So, well,
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that. So good morning, to our members of the committee. For the record, my name is Scott Sanderson. I'm the manager of Conservation Law Foundation's Regional Farm and Food Initiative. And so my job is to coordinate advocacy and services that try to ensure that New England's food system, including Vermont's food system, is able to provide farmers and food professionals a good living, provide everyone access to healthy, affordable food, and of course also steward our environment. And as part of my work, I oversee the Legal Food Hub, which provides free legal assistance to farmers and food professionals in Vermont and New England. And I'm happy to say this month, it looks like we're going to probably place our 1,000th case. So it's going to be a big milestone for us, which is exciting. And so, thank you so much for offering me the opportunity to testify on the Right to Farm bill. I have had a chance to review it, and I think I want to focus my testimony on a question that Senator Campion has asked in a couple of the hearings, and that's whether or not Vermont has a problem with nuisance and trespass lawsuits against farmers that I think that the Right to Farm bill can solve. And I don't think that there is a problem right now that this bill can solve. And in fact, I think that there are a couple problems that this bill would create, including stripping Vermonters of important property rights and also denying them full access to the courts as an option of last resort when that option is needed. And so for those reasons, and I'm going to run through a couple of things here, I think it would be best for Vermont to leave its right to farm law as it is right now. So, I know that you've heard a fair amount of testimony already about nuisance and trespass. The way that I like to think of nuisance and trespass lawsuits is as a Vermonter's last tool, sort of the tool of last resort when a neighbor refuses to respect their property rights, their health, and their welfare, and the government doesn't do enough to protect those things. So in the case of nuisance, of course protects your right to use and enjoy your property. So if I do something on my property that interferes with your use and enjoyment of your property, then that would be a nuisance. And, a typical example of that would be, I do something on my property that creates some sort of toxic chemical and that wafts over to your property. That would be a nuisance. And then trespass, that's going to protect your right to exclusive possession of your property. So if I enter your property or I cause something else to enter your property without your permission, that'd be a trespass. And an example of that would be me dumping sewage onto your property. So that would be the trespass there. And I think what right to farm laws do is they give policymakers an opportunity to fine-tune nuisance and trespass laws to protect farmers from unfair lawsuits while also preserving neighbors' access to the courts, particularly when health, safety, and welfare are on the line. And I think, you've spoken to the worry here, right? The worry is that folks who don't understand farming or who dislike farms will move into a farm community. Maybe they have more resources, and so they're able to file lawsuits just to harass and intimidate a farmer. And because, we just heard about the farms having so much trouble, particularly organic farms right now, farms that are tried for time, don't have a lot of resources right now, those lawsuits can be really intimidating. And so you don't want farmers to have to back down in those situations. Now, I think what happens, the way that the best right to farm laws respond to that circumstance is by protecting the farmers from those frivolous lawsuits while still leaving an out for the neighbor as an option of last resort. And so I think what that means is that good right to farm laws are really a question of balance, and it's balancing the farmer's right to farm free from any form of harassment with the neighbor's right to use and enjoy their property in good health and safety. And so they're not, the best bills, I don't think they pick sides. I think what they do is they balance the farmer's rights. They think about the farmer, they think about the neighbor, they think about the community, and they create conditions where new neighbors can move in to farm communities, be welcome there, whether they're farmers or not, and, sort of grow that community as well.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
do you have a method of separating out the frivolous suits from real?
At what stage? So I think, I think a frivolous lawsuit would be something that would probably be dismissed very, very early in the court process. So, for example, I'll walk through a little bit of the nuisance standard that Vermont has right now. And I think what's important with how Vermont's standard works is that it requires a neighbor to bring evidence that shows a substantial and unreasonable interference with their land. And so a neighbor can't simply file a lawsuit and hope that it's gonna run through. They still have to bring evidence to make their case. And so in the case of Vermont, that standard is actually relatively high. And so they have to bring evidence that shows a substantial and unreasonable interference. And for the interference to be substantial, it has to be more than the customary interference that a land user suffers in organized society. And it has to be offensive to the normal person in the community. And I think that standard is particularly important here because in Vermont, in these farm communities, the normal person in that community, of course, understands that their neighbors might well be farmers, that their neighbors might have to spread manure, all those sorts of things, right? And so sort of in response to that, this worry about, is nuisance really just about taste or preference? So the Vermont Supreme Court has also said that the appearance, so the unsightliness of a thing without more doesn't render it a nuisance under the law. And I think that point, what the court was trying to get at was that nuisance just isn't about taste. It's about real harm. And it's about, it's about creating a standard that requires folks to bring in evidence of real harm, not just sort of point their finger at a farmer and assert nuisance and then intimidate them that way. And so I think that that high standard is one of the reasons why this committee has also heard testimony that these lawsuits are very rare against farmers in Vermont. And, as far as I know, based on the research that I could do, the Airy Point Holdings versus Worsted Farm case, that seems to be the first one in years. And so apart from that standard, I think the second reason that those lawsuits are so rare is Vermont's right to farm law. And, I know that Attorney O'Grady has walked through this as well. And I think what happens with this right to farm law is that it layers on top of that existing standard for nuisance. And so if a farmer can show 4 things, that they're following the law, that they're using good farming practices, that they initiated those practices before the neighbor initiated the non-agricultural activity that they're complaining is being interfered with, and that also the farmer hasn't significantly changed those practices since the neighbor started those activities, then the standard goes up. It's no longer enough just to show a substantial and unreasonable interference. Now the neighbor has to show a significant effect on health, safety, or welfare, or a noxious and significant interference. And that noxious word is kind of a funny one, right?
Well,
Yeah.
the government caused some farmers to have one of those situations when, they started doing manure pits.
Sure.
That liquid manure, some days will almost bring tears to your eyes riding by in your car.
Yeah.
And, back before that, you put in a little manure spreader from a pile, you didn't get those odors.
Right, from the solid stacking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that word noxious, since it's such a rare word now. And it only shows up in a couple cases in Vermont over the years, and it has to do mainly with things that are a threat to public health. So, for example, sort of sewage that is running through a street, that kind of thing. And so, that noxious or significant interference, that higher bar at the end, the significant interference with health, welfare, safety, that bar is a bit higher for sure after the right to farm law takes effect and after the farmer can show those things. And then I guess there's also the third reason I think that these lawsuits are so rare. And, I think we've heard a lot of testimony from farmers speaking to the fact that they, care a lot about their communities, that they're going out into the community, educating folks on what's going on. And I think that care is reflected by a lot of neighbors as well. I don't think most neighbors' first reaction to, something that is sort of bothering them or is creating a problem is to, serve papers and file in court. I think in general, they'll go to their farmer neighbor, raise the issue, see if they can talk it through, and, hopefully handle it in a neighborly way. And so hopefully those 3 things stacked up explain that.
That's the way it should work.
It's the way it should work. It doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in any case, just on the rareness of these lawsuits, I think this sort of brings me to the first problem that I see with the right to farm bill that has been drafted. So it gives neighbors a year to file a lawsuit after a nuisance or a trespass has started, before directing the court to find that nuisance or a trespass just isn't a nuisance or a trespass. So it basically puts a neighbor on a 1-year clock. And 1 year isn't a very long period of time in these matters. So, 1 year is maybe just enough time to talk with your neighbor and figure out a resolution and to resolve an issue. It's certainly not enough time if you want to raise a complaint with one of the relevant agencies and hope for a resolution to take place. And I think with that in mind, this timeframe is a little bit too tight, in that it encourages a neighbor who's experiencing a problem to file a lawsuit as quickly as they can in order to preserve their access to the courts, because they don't want that clock to run out. And 1 year is just a bit too tight for that, I think. Yeah, so, I know that the Airy Point case is certainly on everyone's mind with this bill. This bill certainly seems to address a lot of what happened in that case. And I took a good look at that case, and I think it's actually an example of where right to farm, nuisance, and trespass are kind of working as intended. And I know that folks may disagree with me on that, but I think it's worth emphasizing before I get into the details of that case, that the neighbors in this case, didn't sue until years after the harm had begun. They had raised the issue with the farm. They had raised issues and complaints with the relevant agencies, and the agencies took some action, but it didn't ultimately solve the underlying problems that were taking place. And then
Mr.
another,
Sanderson, what's
yeah,
the name of that case?
it's Airy Point Holdings, so
Okay.
AER, versus Forsteveld Farm.
Okay, that one. Okay, great, thanks.
And then just another point on that case is that the neighbors didn't sue for damages. So they didn't try to punish the farm or put it out of business or anything like that. They just asked for an injunction to stop the harm. And so, in response to that case, what the court held was that the farm in question, they'd caused a nuisance when they had failed to, quote, meet the obligation of every business owner to dispose of its own waste products rather than discharge them onto their neighbor's land. And so what the farm had done was it had implemented a series of new practices, mainly installing a lot of subsurface tile drains. And the result was increasing quantities of wastewater that the court described as the color of chocolate milk that contained E. coli that exceeded Vermont standards for E. coli. And that came out of those tile drains, at pretty high velocity and high volume, and essentially overran the neighbor's property. And so the results of that were E. coli in the neighbor's pond, muddy delta where the neighbors used to spend time, algal blooms and toxic algae where they used to swim, and then also flooded fields where the neighbors used to rotationally graze their cows, sheep, and cattle. So they had started a farm, and this flooding interfered with that farm as well. And then, of course, I think folks have also mentioned, of course, the manure pits, right? So the farm did install a couple of manure pits that combined with local conditions to cause fumes and ammonia to settle over the neighbor's house. And so for long periods of time, neighbors weren't able to go outside, weren't able to keep their windows open, things like that. And I spoke about that sort of normal member of a community standard. So a number of the pro-farming witnesses, so the witnesses that the farm brought in, they testified that the intensity and the location of the smell were much more than they were accustomed to in this community, that it was significantly exceeded the community standard, even in that agricultural neighborhood that had seen, changes over the years, that was used to all of this, that kind of thing. And so, of course, the court, when it looked at these facts, it had to make sure that it also, that it applied the right standard. So does it apply the normal nuisance standard, nuisance and trespass standard, or does it apply the higher standard based on the right to farm law? And so it found that the right to farm law in Vermont didn't apply to this case because the farm couldn't show that it was actually following the rules, and because the farm had acknowledged breaking Vermont's wetland rules relatively recently. And that also on that last factor, that significant change factor, the farm had effectively started exporting 10 to 15% of the water across all of its property, off of that property, much of it onto the neighbor's property. And so in that way, the way that the court thought about this was that it was a nuisance and a trespass because the farm had effectively discharged waste onto the neighbor's property and offloaded environmental costs that it should have been handling onto the neighbor instead. And so in that way, I think this is a good example of things working. It's the first case that we've seen in a very, very long time. The neighbors, they sued to protect themselves as a matter of last resort. They ran through all the other kind of hurdles, talked to the farmer, talked to the agencies. Agencies reacted. That reaction didn't stop these discharges from affecting their property and their health. And then in the end, of course, there was no request for damages, just a request for things to stop, and not for the farm to stop, just for these consequences and these results to stop.
So did that ever get resolved?
So right now, my understanding is that it is appealed to the Supreme Court, but not on the underlying substance of the issue. So not on the trespass or the nuisance issues. And my understanding is that the court was that the farm was planning to appeal and then missed a deadline. And what is before the Supreme Court is whether or not that is effectively whether or not that deadline was really a deadline. I think, but you may want for that probably be better off asking the attorneys involved in that. I'm not close enough to it. Yeah.
No, that whole issue was, it got totally out of control, you know. It could have been resolved, I would think, in a much easier and quicker way. But I think there was some bad feelings between, you know, the farmer and the neighbor. And but I know, you know, I know all about neighbors ditching and running water onto your property. It's not doesn't make for a good friendly community party, say, with your neighbors.
No. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Scott, the court found in favor of the plaintiff in this case, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So in your view, if the drafted language had been in effect and was indeed our statute, would the same result have happened?
I don't think so. No. So
Why?
So I think for two reasons. So the statute as drafted both creates that 1-year timeline. As far as this case goes, the harms developed over the course of, I think it was 5 years, but I would have to double check on that. And so most of these harms would have been covered by that, I guess you could call it statute of limitations. So they would have been in place for a full year. And therefore the court would be directed under the current bill to find no nuisance, no trespass, regardless of the consequence. And then I think there's a second reason as well. So the second option in the current bill is that the practices in question conform with the required agricultural practices or the water quality statutes. And I think it's a little unclear and would have to be clarified whether or not the specific practice needs to be covered by a specific RAP for it to be covered. But that notwithstanding, the way that the farm tile drained its fields and the way that it directed water, as far as my read of the RAPs go, there's nothing in that violates the RAPs. And so, you know, the RAPs mainly apply to how the fields that are tiled are managed rather than on how the water coming through the tile drains itself is managed.
Okay, I guess I'm not clear on that because I thought you said earlier that the farm admitted that it was not in complying with the RAPs.
That's right. It had violated wetland statutes. And then I believe it had also asserted that the absence of any regulatory action by the agency equated to proof that it was complying with the RAPs. But what happened was it couldn't show any evidence that it was complying at all. Okay. So sort of, you know, photos or things like that. It couldn't show that kind of stuff.
Well, then your argument seems somewhat logical. I just felt that if the farm admitted we weren't doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, that's subsection B here. Therefore, right, and constitutes a nuisance and trespass.
And I think this is one of those things where there's a little bit of room for interpretation in the bill with how narrowly those provisions apply. So, you know, one way of interpreting this case under the proposed bill would be that, okay, the trespass is a result of these tile drains. Let's look for the RAPs that apply to the tile drains specifically. Mm-hmm. Are these tile drains in compliance with those regulations? If so, then this draft right to farm bill would apply. I think a different way to look at that would be more broad and say, okay, is this farm violating, this would be the most broad version, is this farm violating any water quality statute, including, for example, does it have current soil tests for its nutrient management plan, right? And those are much less relevant for this particular trespass, but that could be another interpretation of this bill, right? Okay. And I think that would probably be on the broader side. I think my instinct would be that in interpreting this bill is that you would look for the tile drain regulations in this case. That would be, yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Could you say something about, you said stripping Vermonters, some Vermonters of property rights. What do you mean by that exactly?
Sure. So I think there are two parts to this. I think this has to do with the extension of right to farm to include trespass and not just nuisance. And so that would be quite a big policy shift for Vermont. Now, I described earlier, nuisance is about use and enjoyment of property. Trespass is about exclusive possession of property. It's the idea that, your property is yours. No one else can use it without your say so. And in this case, what the bill would do by adding trespass to this is that it would create certain circumstances under which someone could effectively use your property if they comply with this right to farm law. So for example, running out the 1-year clock, or just making sure that they're in compliance with the water quality statutes. And there is also, and I think Attorney O'Grady alluded to this as well. There's a line of cases in Iowa around a right to farm bill there, or a couple of right to farm bills there that were quite broad, and they only applied to nuisance in this case, but the courts there found that it was broad enough to trigger Iowa's takings clause under the Iowa Constitution. So similar to the Fifth Amendment taking clause, similar to Vermont's takings clause. And what the courts found was that this right to farm law was so broad that it effectively created an easement on neighboring properties, and that those neighbors were owed compensation for public use effectively. Now, I don't know exactly how this law would be interpreted under that kind of reasoning, but I think the important thing there is that they were only looking at nuisance, and trespass is a much more sort of fundamental stick in the bundle of property rights. And so I think that, it's definitely something to keep in mind and to look into, are the sort of those possible implications there.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess the second part on that is sort of relates to some other testimony that the committee's heard around how Vermont's right to farm statute has become kind of an outlier in the US. I think that hasn't always been true. So in 2003, there was a case, and the Vermont Supreme Court looked at Vermont's right to farm law, and it specifically commented, this looks a lot like what we're seeing all around the country. And I think that was because at the time, a lot of other states looked at right to farm in essentially the same way that Vermont looks at it, where it's about balancing, right? Protecting farmers from these unfair lawsuits while still providing that option of last resort, right? And I think what's changed is not Vermont's outlook, but that other states, often under a lot of pressure from sort of the giants of industrial agriculture, they started to push towards these right to farm laws that allow big industrial farms to ignore their neighbors. And that includes small farms as well. And so if you start to look to, the experiences of places like Missouri and North Carolina, you see these right to farm laws being used as kind of a bludgeon for really big operations to locate themselves and sort of eventually just push away the neighbors, whether those neighbors are just living there or whether they're just small farms trying to make a living. And so, I think what makes Vermont's law unique at this stage is not that it's weak or anything like that. I think it's really that it still genuinely takes farmers, neighbors, and their communities into account. And I think that's rare in the right to farm world right now.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So you've laid out some of your concerns with the draft. Do you have sort of an opinion on what state might have the best right to farm law from your perspective representing CLF?
I mean, in my perspective representing CLF, I honestly think that Vermont has one of the best right to farm laws out there. There are, I suppose you could look for ways to simplify things. There's been testimony on that, this looks a little bit complicated, things like that.
4 elements.
Yeah, absolutely. And there might be ways to look at that. I would have to do a little bit more thinking to sort of figure out exactly what those tweaks might look like. But I really do think that Vermont has one of the better right to farm laws. And I think that's also because of the standard that Vermont sets for nuisance, sort of that underlying standard. That's a pretty good protection already. You know, a neighbor does have to bring pretty substantial evidence to show a nuisance. And then if the farmer can bring additional evidence to show those 4 factors, standard goes up. You know, maybe that's the place to look, is to look at those factors, figure out how, you know, how you could I guess, set up the proof that a farmer needs to bring a little bit more, I guess, accommodating for the realities of farming, accommodate the realities of farming in those factors in some way. But I don't have a specific thought on that, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and basically, we were, you know, the new draft is quite a lot shorter
Yeah, absolutely.
and compact, and that was one issue that we're trying to, you know, to achieve, is getting it simplified and more direct. Well, we, you know, we still got quite a lot of work, I guess, and things to decide on this particular issue before us. There are other questions for Scott?
I didn't know, were you finished? Was that everything?
I just have a couple more things to just to note, mainly on the water quality statutes aspect of this. And, you know, we talked about already the tile drains and how the required agricultural practices interact with that. You know, I think the other aspect of this is that, and I think AAFM may have made this point last week or the week before, just to note that the water quality regulations themselves don't cover the full range of activities that might result in a trespass or a nuisance. And so I think the example that the agency brought up specifically was that they had power to abate nuisances mainly on large farm operations, but that they didn't have that power with small farm operations, medium farm operations, certified small farm operations. And so I think that would be something to look at as well. And then just sort of like that underlying point, if we're focused on compliance as the sort of the key criteria for determining whether something's a nuisance or not, or a nuisance or a trespass or not, as opposed to just whether additional protections apply, then I think that's putting a lot of weight on, putting a lot of reliance on whether ANR and AAFM are able to fully administer and enforce the regulations that we do have. Because if that's our test and we're taking away the option of last resort, then neighbors do need to make sure that they're always relying on the agencies. And I think the Erie Point case, the way that came out, the agency did intervene, but it just didn't turn out, they didn't really have the authority to abate the problem in the end. And then, you know, I know that the committee is aware of CLF's petition to the EPA around authority over agricultural water quality, where we documented the challenges that the two agencies have working with each other on agricultural water quality and the implications of that. You know, those challenges are very real and create concerns when they interact with a right to farm law similar to the draft one. So yeah, I think that's most of the stuff that I have.
Yeah. Yeah, they have seemed to have problems working together.
Yeah.
Pretty hard to believe when they both work for the same boss.
Absolutely, I suppose.
Seems like the boss ought to straighten that out. Now that's the way it works in a small business. Are there other questions? No.
That's very helpful.
Well, certainly appreciate your coming in.
Well, thanks very much.
And giving us your time and you know, your ideas and thoughts will make it helpful for us. And you know, if you if you do run across, if you're thinking about this and run across anything else,
Absolutely.
feel free to contact us. We'll, we'll keep considering all the different aspects and go from there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate
thank
all
you.
of your time.
Sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thanks for making the effort.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And I'm glad I didn't have to use it.
The eject button, I almost forgot about it. But I was on pins and needles, don't worry. So.
I forgot about it too.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
thank you very
appreciate it.
much.
Yeah,
Good to meet you.
wonderful.
Well, that was good, and we'll have to weigh those, certainly those ideas and suggestions out, and one of these days determine if we wanna, move forward or just alter what we have in a minor way to simplify it to some degree, and or if they're happy with the way it is, leave it alone. But, anything else? We sort of worked on, I don't think we have anyone else coming. We gotta, that's that, right? And Linda, we've been working on next week's schedule.
Yep.
And we'll finalize that, pretty well finalized, right? Linda?
Yeah.
Want to run through it?
Sure. On Tuesday, we'll be hearing from the Vermont Sugar Makers Association and Sustainable Jobs Fund has asked for some time. Wednesday from 9 to 11, there's a farm to school day. We're going to have quite a few people, mostly via Zoom, who will be coming through to talk to you about farm to school day, which that is.
Great.
And then Travis Thomason, the state conservationist, has been invited. I haven't got confirmation on it for Wednesday. Thursday, Celine DeSuze.
Yeah.
Celine is a farm business planner, will be coming in on small farm issues. And we also have some people coming in on the right to farm from the agency, including about pesticides.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Handle that.
overspray.
The pesticide director, Steve Linnell, will be joining us to call you.
We haven't met the new guy.
The new Kerry.
And, that trespass issue is a real issue. And we want to protect the neighbor.
And then here's, we also have several members of the agency coming in on milk bonding. Unless you want to preempt that with something from Laura Ginsburg.
Well, what I was thinking, we make people that buy milk bond so in case they go broke or something, the farmer still gets paid. And, we have sugar makers now that are making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of maple syrup. And what I thought, I haven't heard of any issues or problems, but if we have people buying maple syrup that's, $1 million worth or whatever, and if the sugar maker doesn't get, the farmer doesn't get paid when they deliver that, is that sugar processor that buys it, are they bonded? So in case something goes haywire, I'd like to get ahead of that and not get behind it and have a purchaser go out of business and stiff our producers.
Be happy to,
Huh?
I'd be happy to contact, the Marvins and Butternut,
Well,
because they're the largest processors by far in the state.
in Vermont,
They
I
take-
thought
They
we,
take half the syrup in the state.
I thought we'd get the agency and to get their feel of it. And, you know, if it's going good, why bother? I didn't think, I knew Dave bought a lot, but
Well, you know, he's got both kids with him now, but they buy half of all the syrup in the state.
and they may pay their guys when they deliver. I don't.
I have no idea.
Yeah, but, I just, you know, we have, that, product has advanced a great deal and grown, a lot here and, just, you know, before there is an issue,
Yeah.
get ahead of it a little bit and figure that
Sounds
out.
good.
And, so we'll talk about that and maybe after we talk with them, we can decide if, you know, certainly wouldn't do anything without getting them in English.
It just, if that fit in and you wanna proceed with it, they'd be, they're good family. They're-
Yeah.
And Emma, his daughter's taken over a lot.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Yeah, years back, we used to, we used to go to Canada and get syrup on, take drums and get drums. Seemed like there was an outfit up here in Barry that, up in the industrial park. Seemed like we used to go there too. But whoever we get in from the agency can, you know, explain who's out there and the volume they buy and just get their take on it. Because never hear anything, but we know that, you know, that's a big business. You know, some people like St. Pierre's, I think they do over 100,000 taps. The Brannons and the Horgans and there's so. And again, you know, if there's anything that you want to get on the agenda, we've got some little spots.
We have a little bit of time.
Yeah,
Next week,
so-
and Friday's open.
Should we get the sludge guy in here?
Oh, yeah.
The what?
Be interesting. Sludge.
Is that Matt Chapman? Who deals with the sludge
Oh,
See
disbursement
where
on
else.
farms?
He's with the
Oh.
agency.
I think so, yeah.
And so, yeah.
we have,
Matt?
Yeah.
Matt's the division, for the waste.
Yeah, he'd be interesting.
hi, Michael.
Hi, Matt is the head of the solid waste division at A&R,
Okay.
and Eamon Tuhig is the staffer at A&R that's in charge of the biosolids program.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But
Be interesting, yeah. See if there are any of those
did you
left.
tell us, Michael, there's only one community that still does land application?
Hold on a second, I asked Matt that question and he emailed me and I just need to find the email. There's currently one site where septage, waste pumped from septic systems, is land applied, and it's in Sheldon. And then there are 3 Class B permitted facilities that are actively used for land application: Swanton, Essex Junction, and Windsor. So technically there are 4 sites.
That'd be interesting. That's your district, right? Essex Junction.
Well, it would be good to
Be interesting.
get them in to find out if this sludge is tested at the site, and then if there are follow-up tests on the fields, and just how that practice is managed. So, so if we got some extra time in there, when we will talk that. Yep. Anything else? Well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a little coffee break.